Hello, everyone. It's Kate Stillman with Yogahealer.com, and I'm here with Brett Larkin of BrettLarkin.com. And those who don't know Brett, she is this absolute mastermind of online yoga teacher training courses. Her bio is super impressive, like just who she's been and what she's done in the field of online yoga and being known with Uplifted Yoga as a successful global business. And she's taught in Silicon Valley's hottest companies and won YouTube Next Up Award as one of the top emerging channels on YouTube. You have a background as a Bachelor in Fine Arts from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. And you've just got, in many ways, built this platform for yourself and really for a lot of people to like see you and doing yoga online and to learn from that and to learn how to develop their own voice and teacher training. And I thought really that's where we could begin. I was just telling Brett that I've had a very interesting morning. I was on with Deva Premal and Miten, and they're so amazingly, like they just vibrated at the vibration of love. And there's no obstruction to that in the field. So like the contact high is really tangible. And this, there's people having this experience like right now on this planet of completely unlimited embodiment and bliss and connection and service. And then juxtaposed to that, I was talking with someone who is really, really limited and really nervous about like wanting to pivot professions as a wellness pro, going from allopathic to holistic and helping in yoga and Ayurveda, and completely afraid, like just like deer in the headlights, like it just can't think her way out of it, because whenever she allows her mind to dominate, it's just fear and contraction. When we dug into the fears, and they're mostly ungrounded, they're probably 100% ungrounded at the bottom of them. But her pattern, her samskara is to go into this contraction and negativity. And I was thinking, because then you were up next, Brett, and I was like, you and I have both really put ourselves out there for years and years. And there were certain blocks and hurdles that anyone who's put themselves out there and gotten traction has worked through in terms of voice around exposure, around messaging and vulnerability and authenticity and being real who you are and real on the internet. And so I was thinking, like, who better to talk to than someone who won YouTube's Next Up Award? Who's often wearing a tank top on YouTube. Or no, what were you saying last time? A sports bra.
A sports bra, because you get more clicks the less clothing you wear. I know, it's so terrible. When a consultant told me that, I was horrified. I'm so excited to be on the show, Kate. You know, I'm such a huge fan of your work, and your book, Body Thrive, is so amazing. I am doing all the habits, and I'm telling everyone I know to read it. So I just want to also thank you for being so incredible. And
I'm so glad you're here. Yeah.
I know, I am really glad I'm here. And I think if people are listening and they're kind of starting their journey and they're thinking about putting themselves out online, a lot of what I talk to my students about is that it's a completely different brain space than the yoga teaching. I kind of think of it as putting on a different hat, where I switch from being the yogi to being my manager and thinking about how I'm going to market myself. And that's a skill that is developed. And I think people think it comes naturally, but actually I felt fear at every single stage in my journey. And I'm sure you can relate to that. I think that's just so important to share, because I think so often my students think, well, it was just easy. You know, you see people who maybe have a big following online and you think, oh, well, it must have been easy for them to get there, or it just happened overnight, or it was a instant success. And it is like battling the demons. I literally think of like, you know, Durga or Kali, like wielding the sword, slashing the demon of fear, like every single step of the way as you go through this. And it's not talked about enough.
It's not. And even if you've heard it before, it's not talked about enough, because it's what is it right now? Like, what is in that image of holding the sword and slashing the fear, like into the darkness, like light moving into darkness. right? Like clarity moving into the shadow is what,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and getting honest with yourself about what you want to slay. I think what's so interesting is so many of my students and people who end up training to teach doing online yoga teacher training with me, they're like in denial. And I see myself in them because I was in denial too about even wanting to step into the role of a healer or wanting to step into the role of the teacher. When I took my first yoga teacher training, I was just telling myself, I'm doing this to deepen my own practice. This is just for me. I'm never going to leave the corporate world. I'm never going to teach. I almost had to lie to myself to get on the path. And I see that in so many folks where this idea that you could maybe make a living or not just a decent living, but a good living doing something you love feels so scary and unattainable and almost like, is this allowed? It's so funny because I was even saying to my husband the other day, I was like, is this allowed? Like the success that, you know, the channel and the trainings and everything has brought. I mean, that's a lot of fear that I'm slaying now is just like handling the success. You know, it's like we're all battling fear at every step of our journey, no matter where we are.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I mean, I just, along those lines, right, where we assume that other people don't have to do it. We assume that other people like just naturally found their branding and their messaging and their platform and their, you know, and their path this way without that fear. To me, it's really a fascinating thing. I've been noticing a lot. I've been reading. I talked with Katie Silcox, and she said her favorite book was Woman as Healer, and it was published in '91 by Jean Achterberg, I believe. And I picked it up and I started reading about like this history. And I think we all have like threads of this story in us, of like the history of women in healing and how, you know, many moons ago, women were healers and had a voice and had authority. And then a couple thousand years ago, that was stripped, and then it was illegal to practice healing and have any sort of authority. And that lasted for many more moons until more or less like the 1960s, right? If we're like honest with ourselves. So this pattern to me is super fascinating, where the men I know don't have as much issue with it, especially the men in business that I know. I work a lot with men in my mastermind group who also have companies the size of mine or larger, and this depth of apprehension of like making your move in the world or of being who you are authentically and outwardly and overtly it's just not the same. And then I also see women being competitive with each other instead of collaborative with each other. Whereas like when you and I, you know, you were really collaborative from the start and was like, hey, let's just hang out and see if we vibe. And we're like, okay, we vibe. Okay, cool. Now let's see what, you know, like, let's just see what's trying to happen here, you know, by our like universes intersecting by Venn diagramming. And we found like just a lot of interesting ways to grow what each other's doing. And that to me is like, this is new skill sets, like for women, to not judge each other in the social space, to not tear each other down, to not actually orient from competition, which we had to do for so long because that was the only way we would survive.
I love so much of what you're saying. I want to dive back into what you said about the history, right, of this, because in my 300, 500 online YTT, there's a part where I talk about there's actually this thing called the witch wound. Have you heard about this, Kate? It's like where a lot of the fear I think we feel as women, it's like this handed down fear through generations, really, of back when as a woman speaking out could literally mean that you would be stoned to death in certain periods of history. And so I think some people might think, oh, well, that's kind of extreme and an intense way to look at it. But I think I like to share it with my students because I think some women literally feel primal fear when they're putting themselves out on social media for the first time, when they're asking money for yoga for the first time, when they're doing these things. Like, it feels terrifying in not like a intellectual way, in a primal way. And I think bringing an awareness of that like, oh, this is like stuff we're working through, not just individually, but as a collective. I think it helps normalize like why you might feel so terrified. So whether you vibe with that or not, I always just like to share that with people, because when I first read about it, I felt like that was a huge aha moment of like why the fear felt so potent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then, I mean, I love what you said about the collaboration. It's so, the flip side of social media is like you're just always seeing what everyone else is doing. And I always say, like, notice what triggers you. If someone's triggering you on social media, it probably means they're doing something that you wish you were doing, or maybe they're really rubbing you the wrong way. And then they're acting as a mirror for you. They're acting as a shadow, right? Where they're suddenly prompting you to do some self-inquiry. And what happens so often is we just start to judge. It's like they have better numbers than me, or, they have more comments or more likes. And it can be so, so challenging to let go of this spirit of competition, because I think it's just been bred in us, again, like culturally. And it's time to stop. It's time to
Yeah.
stop.
Yeah. And it's like reverse diaphragmatic breathing. Like you may have to remind yourself like 500 times a day to like exhale, right? To like to just drop it, to drop in and to drop that. I notice a lot when I notice I'm judging women, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's part of this pattern that keeps me from being more of me and in my voice and in what I want to draw attention to, and whatever I'm messaging. I've been doing a lot of messaging the last few years around like just eating weeds, around invasive weeds, and not needing to buy supplements in the grocery store, but just so it's like if that's my truth, like can I just please use that opportunity instead of to react, to really just be a lot more grounded in my own voice and more proactive. I'd love to hear, this moving into voice and messaging and believing in your own self and your own dream and your own way of doing it. Because this is where, I hear excuses or assumptions that like the space is too crowded, I'm too late to the game, like I wouldn't, like who am I to say this? So there's stuff around authority, there's stuff around competition. Uh, and I always, like when I look back, like for me, there was just a burning desire to do something better than I had access to at the time. Like the way that I wanted to teach Ayurveda in 2001 was just based on like practicality. I'm like, this is so easy. It's so easy to help someone understand this. And then the other day I was in a friend's kitchen, and his teenage daughter just had a relapse with anorexia. And so I asked him a few questions, and then I asked him a few more questions, and I asked him a few more questions. And I'm always just looking for like, where's the root? Like, what's the simplest solution to this really kind of super hard to deal with problem that they've already sunk a ton of time, energy, money into without healing happening, right? And I'm like, that's to me what it was with Ayurveda. It was like, there's just, and for this, it was actually, and I'm going to do a podcast on it, it was spices. She has Vata type Vishama Agni. So food is uncomfortable in her body. No one's helping her rebuild her Agni for her body type. It's like the simplest solution, and it costs pennies, like pennies, fennel seeds, like pennies. Like you might not be able to find fennel seeds growing outside your door like you might be able to find thistle or dandelion, but still, like Whole Foods has fresh fennel seeds. It's pennies on the dollar. And that's what I felt like I just had to teach Ayurveda my way. And like come hell or high water. Like I cared enough about people that had backgrounds like I had, where we just suffering totally unnecessarily from not understanding my dosha type, not understanding my Agni type, not understanding my own mind and how that was different than other people's mind. And then on a greater scale, just not understanding that like there's rhythm to the daily cycle. And if I align to that, everything goes great. And if I don't, everything turns to shit. So, for me, that was what was worth it to get out there and do it my way. And I think it's important for people to to like live from their why, like find their why and then live and orient it from it. So I'd love to hear for you, because you've you've obviously been really rooted to be able to go, so out there on the web in such a committed way.
What I hear from so many folks, which I think is what you're talking about, is they're blocked from getting started, and they have this like, why would anyone hear what I want to say? Or why would anyone want to take my yoga class? Or why would anyone listen to me as an authority? I hear that so often. And if anyone out there is in that space and listening, I mean, the big message that I have for you, and I tell my students, is that no one's going to teach yoga the way you do. Like, you are a unique specimen at this time in the planet. And I always like to use the example of being in a class and we hear the same cues over and over again. And then one day a teacher cues and teaches pigeon pose and says something, and you experience the pose in a whole new way. Or you might even have this incredible awareness of your thoughts, or realization that you tend to push yourself too far or not push yourself enough. And it's like this epiphany moment. It's like, light bulb went off. And it was that cue from that specific teacher in that moment. You'd probably heard that cue a million times before from other teachers, or you just weren't in the right space or with the right moment and right person on the other end to hear it. So I try to share that because you can be that for someone else. Someone's going to need to hear the cues from you, not from me, not from Kate. It's going to be a special way, a special flavor that you bring to it. So it's like your personality, your unique DNA specimen that's here as a perfect creature on earth, blended with the teachings, blended with the ancient practices, that's going to come out in a totally new way. It's like, it's not even something you have to achieve. It's just natural. It's just going to sound so unique and special because it's coming through you. It's coming through your instrument instead of through my instrument. And then I think a lot of people, and I started out this way too, to talk a little bit about myself. I think a lot of us, when we're starting to teach yoga, and I'm always starting from there because that's my experience, but we imitate our teachers. We don't have our voice yet. We haven't established our brand yet. We don't have mastery of language and cueing yet. So we start kind of mimicking and talking like the people who have been our primary influence, that's why it's the people who we do yoga teacher training with, the people who are our key teachers and influencers. And what I see there is I feel like so many women think that's like wrong, or they're ashamed. So I also just tell everyone, like, we start mimicking others. Like, that's how we get started. I mean, just like a little baby like learns to walk and crawl, right? Like those first couple steps, your first couple steps in your teaching and healing journey, it's okay if you're kind of using your teacher as a template, because that's what I did. I had a teacher I loved, and his voice was like my guiding voice. And I was using him as my pinnacle. And then what happened is you can only change and evolve once you're in action, right? So as I started teaching more and more and got more and more comfortable, all of a sudden, instead of it feeling like it was his voice, it was like my voice also showed up to the party. But I think women have so much fear of like even getting into action, or they feel like that initial kind of mimicry or I don't want to call it like copying, but you know what I'm saying, like, is wrong or something. Like, I even was coaching someone the other day, and she was like, can I use this word on my website? You use that word on your website. And I was like, what?
I don't own the word.
I don't own the word. Like, and again, to bring it back to what we were talking about before, I'm like, a man would never ask that question ever, right? They'd probably just like highlight my whole thing and like tweak a couple things and throw it up. So it's like, get in action and give yourself permission to figure it out as you go. I think that's like the biggest thing I want to share with everyone. And that's been the underpinning of my success, is always being in action so I can fail fast. And like, I discovered my way to my brand. I didn't sit in my office and think it up. I was out there. I was doing periscopes, if anyone can remember Periscope that long ago. I was doing live periscopes every day, talking to my audience, trying to build an audience. I sold my first 100 slots in my membership site from selling on Periscope, live video. It's that kind of action. And what's so cool now is like anyone can start a business from their home by just having the balls to be in action, right? Whether it's like getting on Instagram Live or Facebook Live, or sending out some emails, or posting on social media, or there's so many other ways to do it. I have people in my community who don't want to use social media, and that's fine too. There are a million ways to build a business. The internet is such a gift. I think it's such a gift for women specifically too. So I don't remember your original question, Kate, but I hope that was somewhat helpful. I don't know.
Well, again, it's all, the default to action and small tests and fail fast and learn quick, to orient from why. I just want to like kind of recap some of the ideas that are throwing out here. And it's like, where are people stuck? Is it you don't stand in your why, or is it you're not oriented towards actually taking action? I run into a lot in yoga health coaching with the yoga health coaches, like the perfectionist paradigm. I think Carol Dweck nails this in her book Mindset, where she talks about fixed mindset versus learner mindset. And learner mindset is like people are that they get that the fastest way to grow is to learn, and they're just action oriented, and they're running small tests and noticing what works and what doesn't. Whereas fixed mindset is where people need to finish the thing, polish it, spiff it up, edit it 5,000 times. And by the time they actually like get it, get their video on the internet or whatever, it feels stale or irrelevant. And it wasn't interactive. And that's really where I want to go next. Like for me, social media has always been a conversation, and that conversation started before social media existed, when I first started, just going between yoga studios and my Ayurvedic college, and noticing what conversations were happening. And then in my mind, like, what conversations should be happening? Like, what were the missing conversations? And then just doing workshops on those missing conversations, and then getting feedback and tweaking, and then carrying these conversations back to the Ayurveda school and doing the same thing there from the yoga influence, and then going back to the yoga teacher trainings in San Francisco with, this back and forth conversation. And when people see social media, in my experience, when people see it as you have a fan base or you have a following, like, some of these words to me are so out of order and so misplaced and misguided, and create a lot of separation, when really it's if you orient from connection, it's like, who's in the conversation you're collaborating with? How good are you at listening and then volleying back? And that's the way, for me, it's much more fascinating. It's much less about me. It's much more about whoever's responding and me being more useful. So I can see things like, and I can test things all the time, whether it's on a post or a podcast or whatever, of like, hey, where did this gain traction? And then what else do they want next? So we did this podcast, like this one thing pops to mind where I did this one on Vata body types who are overweight. And so then all these pittas and kaphas were like, do one on pitta, like do one on kapha. Like, I'm not Vata. You're not speaking you're not speaking to me. Speak to me directly. So then I was like, okay, great. And so then that becomes the volley back. And then I'll do one on the eating disorders for each constitution, because I'm like, I know that was specific enough that people could tune into. And it's so much less about me and so much more about like, oh, this is part of the conversation that I feel really driven to message on right now. Who's going to respond? How do they want to receive it? And then if I can just get more skillful in that, it's a conversation. It's not a fan base.
I think so many women, myself included, have this disease called perfectionism, and it just kills your business. It just is it's lethal. I love so much of what you're saying, and I love talking about really focusing on your MVP, your minimum viable product, just testing, just exactly like what Kate's talking about, like putting out, whether it's an article or a video, and seeing what works. You have to be in co-creation, collaboration with your community. I mean, let's get rid of the word fan base. They're going to tell you what they want, but again, you have to be in action. So, I mean, for me, this is it's like embarrassing, but it never occurred to me to put a yoga teacher training online. I was in co-creation with my community around my membership site and the YouTube channel and all these other things. And people started asking for it. It was their idea. It wasn't my idea. And so just like Kate's saying, whether it's a certain niche or a certain topic, I think this is where the perfectionism piece, it's like women, or again, creatives or healers, we want to like be in a box and creating something. And I love being in creation mode, like whether it's writing PowerPoints for the trainings or setting up scripts that I'm going to then create videos out of, or kind of being in that solo mode of creation. And I think that's the comfort zone for a lot of people. Like that's much more comfortable than, I don't know, sending a bunch of scary emails to people who you want to be on their podcast, or putting something up on a bunch of social media channels and then doing a Facebook Live to promote it. So I feel like so many of us gravitate towards kind of like the solo activities where we can then like let our perfectionism shine and spend all this time. And what can happen is you can end up creating a product that then you find out your target demographic or your audience doesn't want, and you wasted so much time creating something and putting energy into something that actually isn't the right fit. So this is where this idea of like running all these little tests, and it's so liberating when you adopt this mindset. This is like my big thing I want to share with folks, because when you're in that solo perfectionism mode, you're like, it's on me to make this work or not work. And then if it fails, you feel terrible about yourself. Instead, just think of yourself as like a scientist in this giant laboratory. That's how I think of myself every day. And it's just like, what's sticking? What's not working? I mean, I talked to my marketing person yesterday, Kate, and we like put up a new funnel and it's not performing as well as we thought. And she's like, well, we'll tweak this and we'll tweak that. And I'm like, well, this topic of this funnel just might not be right. And it's kind of just like throwing paint at the wall, you know?
Yeah.
You have to be willing to just like let stuff go. And the great news, you'll appreciate this, is I only wrote the first 4 emails of the funnel because I was like, we're not going to build this out. We're not going to do anything around this until we test and see all the conversions and know if it works. But like, this is a very specific way of thinking that I just think not enough people are aware of. So yeah.
Well, and this whole like lean startup methodology and the mindset training that goes along with it, it's like not, and like agile project management, it comes from tech. It doesn't come from like how we were raised in school.
No, not at all.
There's so much on learning of like fail fast. And then let's talk a little bit about following, like really listening and really following desire as a spiritual path. As opposed to any kind of constriction, like anywhere we feel limited in our life or misaligned or even inefficient, meaning like not able to align to time in ways that feel, I would even go to the point of magical, right? Where you can like shape shift, time bend, move things quickly. Because to me, like that's really where yoga goes. Like that's really especially in Tantra, like the path is completely free. The elements are completely adaptable. Like you get to, like you were saying, scientist in the laboratory, like you get to play the divine in action, and to practice this as the path of yoga rather than level 3 poses or whatever. Because to me, like my path started to pivot pretty dramatically the more I realized like my practice is off the mat, primarily off the mat.
Mm-hmm.
Like how I show up, how many lives I can affect, like in real action, like in real time, often through deep conversation or coaching or, putting a teaching out there and receiving and help people just really, shift. But I have to listen a lot. Like I really have to listen to like, what do I want? How do I want to use time? Like, what do I want to be doing in this next quarter? And I do about a quarterly review and then realign so that I don't devitalize my Shakti, so that I'm like continually like replenishing and rejuvenating and making it so that like I don't lose my why or deeper meaning. So, I mean, what's your sense of this as like people are learning teacher trainings and whatnot, that it's like so much more beyond the poses and so much more about awakening people to their power in their life and their voice and
No, it is. I mean, and that's one of the reasons I love having the way I do the online training is interactive. It's not just like you watch videos at home, because I think what people don't realize when they embark on this journey, just like you're saying, it's like you start doing it because of the poses and to refine your alignment and because you think you want to teach. And then we end up going into the Yoga Sutras and all this tantric philosophy. And you realize like this is about your life. It becomes a very emotional experience for people. And that's why, like your community too, Kate, you provide so much interaction and support for folks. And That's actually one of the how Kate and I got connected, was from a student who worked with both of us and was like, what you guys are doing is so unique because of that. So it's interesting. I think if we're talking about me personally, yoga has changed so much. I mean, my first class I ever did, 15 years ago or whatever, was a Bikram class. It was like the opposite of what I do now, which is, my personal practice. It doesn't even feel like doing yoga. It just feels like setting myself up for the day, because I have a early morning practice that I do before everyone else in my house wakes up. And it's like showering. It doesn't, like it doesn't feel like an activity anymore. Even like I'd say 2 or 3 years ago, it would be like, oh, I'm going to do my yoga practice in the afternoon, or it felt like a thing. And now it's just it's like brushing my teeth. It's just like, oh yeah, this is completely embedded into the fabric of my life. And I need to set up in the early morning hours, set up my mindset and set up so I can really kick ass the rest of the day in terms of knowing what to focus on, choosing how to manage my time, not losing my temper, showing up as a wonderful mother and partner, and also inspiring my team and keeping them excited and motivated and supporting our student base. I think the more you have going on, I mean, the more pivotal, and I don't really like the word self-care because it's such a buzzword that gets thrown around, but I'd say energy management maybe becomes. And you've talked a little bit about the why a couple times throughout this conversation. And, one thing I want to just share about that is, like, for folks who don't know what their why is, get into action and it'll come to you. Kind of just like your branding, you kind of like throw paint at the wall and see what sticks. It's really interesting because my first Facebook group, which I think has 10 or 12,000 people in it, it's called Yoga Hackers because I didn't have the name uplifted at the time. Like, I was just like, oh, I have to call it something. And I knew I didn't like Yoga Hackers, but I was like, well, it's that or not get started. So I just started it, and like, it's okay, right? Things just evolve. You can always change the titles of things or logos after the fact. I mean, that's the least important thing of all of this. And it's like the same with your why. If you're not super connected to like a deep, deep why yet, and Kate, I'm interested because you might disagree, but I feel like sometimes you just have this yearning to teach, or this yearning to share, or a yearning for a change in your life, and you don't know the exact like why statement yet. So I just want folks to know, like, I think that was me. I didn't have a clear why. I knew that I wanted more and different than what my present circumstances were. And the why has gotten a lot clearer as I've gone along the journey.
Yeah. Yeah, like what's not working, right? Like what's working, what's not working. Like, what's the biggest challenge? Like paying attention to all of these things, and then taking action, reorienting so intuition gets stronger. I had a really strong why from pretty early on. I was one of those. And I've done so many interviews with yoga and Ayurvedic gurus to know that, like, some had that, some didn't, right? And I was just like one of those, I'm here for a very specific purpose. And in high school, I knew what it was. Like, and it hasn't really wavered, but I've gone about it in different ways. And I couldn't agree with you more of, like, you can find a way by what's not working. And I continually do that. I love having like an energy and engagement journal of like, how engaged am I and how energized am I in any given activity throughout the day? And I just track so that I can know, and I can actually analyze then at the end of a week, like, hey, wow, there's a slight pivot happening in here, get to the root of that. And there's also a slight pivot happening here where, like, wow, more of my focus wants to go in that direction next. And then changing action. And I think when we get really good at this, it's like because we're that accountable to ourselves that we don't let it build up more than a week before we're like, oh, okay, this is where the Shakti's leading next.
And this is where the yoga, I think, really helps us, because it shows us how limited our mindset can be. Like, some people listening to this might have a mindset limitation that, like, work has to be hard, or certain parts of work are always going to be boring. Or for myself, I mean, I had this mindset limitation that all yoga teachers were poor. That was something I thought for 7 years. And it prevented me from pursuing a career in yoga. It prevented me from leaving my tech job. I mean, that story was so strong that it was just reality. And I wasn't able to recognize it as a total structure of my own mind until I worked with a really incredible coach. And he was like, well, who are the examples you're using as yoga teachers? And I was like, this friend who can't pay her rent, and these other teachers that I know in person who are like really struggling, and this other girl who just lost money on this retreat. And he was like, well, why aren't your examples of yoga teachers Deepak Chopra and Gabrielle Bernstein? He was like, they're yoga teachers. They're not poor. And it was like such a huge moment for me when I realized like I was surrounding myself with examples. And I'm sharing this because I'm hoping listeners can think of like, where are you doing this in your own life? I was surrounding myself with evidence and examples to support a mindset that was just completely holding me back and preventing me from taking action. And we all do this. And the yoga practice, whether it's meditation, pranayama, asana, whatever you're doing, hopefully all three, or just do Kundalini if you want to do all three in a short 45-minute period. That's what I do. It shows us where we're telling ourselves these stories and these lies that seem like reality, but they're not.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's right there in the first book of the Yoga Sutras, that Chitta Vritti Nirodha, like the fluctuations of the mind that are not in alignment with who you want to become next. Like cut that malarkey out. And if it becomes the focus, whether you're focusing on the wrong people in your life or focusing on limiting beliefs or thoughts or limitation, the voice is a limitation rather than the voices of potentiality. Like that stuff, that's night or day between failure and success.
And who you surround yourself with, right? That's why the community
Yeah.
aspect that is a part of, I know what we both offer. Like, I just think it's so valuable. I mean, what's that saying? Like, you are the average of the 3 people you hang out most with, or 10 people you hang out most with,
Well,
or
and
whatever.
then the additional research on that is the people they hang out with. And that's something I
Right.
started to really pay attention to. It's not necessarily who just I'm hanging out with, but who are the people I'm hanging out with. And that's where, especially for those of you wanting to up level your game and plug into the field of potentiality and like really, go for it on a whole other level. Like the more you pay attention to that second circle out, and the more you cultivate based on that, like, wow, expect massive change, because all of a sudden these networks open to you that support and lift and guide and develop you. And that has been for me just like so phenomenal to tap into that. And I really thank Benjamin Hardy in his research of his book Willpower Doesn't Work for pointing that out and like, exposing that research that was, somewhat hidden away somewhere.
And this is where we come back to the internet being such a gift, right? Because how could we do this so easily 30 years ago? I mean, I know so many of us, we feel surrounded by people who maybe don't necessarily support our spiritual journey or our yogic path or our persistent quest for self-development in my case, or, whatever it may be. But the internet makes it so magical and easy to be able to get on live calls and group calls and programs like Kate's or mine, where it's like you get to be with a tribe of people who are working through the same things as you and using the tools of yoga and Ayurveda to find a new way to come into homeostasis, body and mind, and then really live up to your fullest potential.
Awesome. Well, I'm so glad we had this conversation. I feel like a lot of yoga health coaches and yoga teachers and wellness pros who really want to, who want to maybe just have more of what you and I experience, whether it's in terms of traction or whether it's in terms of lifestyle, or whether it's just for them to find their own voice and message and community. I think this has been really super helpful. And I'm glad that we've been able to have a really transparent conversation, especially, you coming from this background of really being out there on YouTube.
Well, thank you for having me, Kate. It was really fun to chat with you.
So everyone, this has been Brett Larkin, who has like the most popular online yoga teacher training. And you can find brettlarkin.com, and you can also find Uplifted Yoga.